Lieutenant Advitya Bal on board, both young pilots. One was 36, one was 26. They both tragically did not survive the crash. They both perished in the crash. So two qualified pilots, both equally qualified to fly MiG-21s alone, even at night. How could this have happened? Well, the short answer to that is we don't know yet, because only a crash investigation can find out. Remember, MiG-21s have safety features like ejection seats. So the big question is, why were these fighter pilots not able to eject? And if they were trying to eject, why did the ejection system not complete itself? So those, let's get that one question right out of the way. I don't want to jump the gun on why this accident happened, because military aviation is very complex. There could be a variety of factors. We will only know once the crash inquiry actually gets set. The second question that a lot of you have been sending me is, why do MiG-21s appear to crash so much? This is actually an excellent question. Let me give you some data, folks. The MiG-21 entered service with the Indian Air Force way back in 1963, which means this fighter has been in service across many different versions and variants, for almost 60 years. It's the oldest fighter that has ever, served in the Indian Air Force, the longest serving fighter. Nearly 900 of these aircraft have been inducted since the 1960s. The last versions were actually license built in India in the 1990s, and it was one of those that actually may have crashed on Thursday night. Of the about 874 aircraft that MiG-21s that the Indian Air Force has operated since the 1960s, a staggering 400 plus have crashed in accidents, not retired, but crashed. And in those crashes, about 200 plus pilots, including the two young men who died on Thursday night, have lost their lives. 200 pilots in one aircraft type across 60 years, and 50 civilians on the ground have also lost their lives in MiG-21 crashes. So it's no surprise that this is an aircraft that suffers an extremely negative reputation in the public sphere. Now, why are MiG-21s still in service is a complicated question I will get to, but why do MiG-21s appear to crash so much? The answer to that is MiG-21s have been operated by the Indian Air Force in such large numbers compared to every other fighter for the longest time. It's no longer true right now. Right now, there are only about 4 squadrons of MiG-21s still in service. That's about 72 aircraft. They're going to be retired in the next 3 to 4 years. But through their lifetime, MiG-21s have been the backbone of the Indian Air Force, which means a large number of them have operated, which means more sorties, more flights, more pilot hours, basically more flights have been generated, which means more wear and tear. And therefore, if you look at it arithmetically, if you adjust the fleet size across types, compare the man hours, the pilot hours, the number of, flights that have been generated on this one type, it actually isn't much worse than certain other fighters in the Indian Air Force. This is actually something that most people don't know. But since there are so many more MiG-21s across many years and so many more flights, and therefore the possibility of a greater number of accidents, it just looks like the MiG-21 is crashing all the time. That is by no means to say that the MiG-21, the things are hunky-dory with the aircraft. Absolutely not. But I'm saying it's not as black and white as people think, saying Widowmaker and Flying Coffin and things like that. Question number 3, why are they still in service? Excellent question, and one that I feel very strongly about. And the answer to that is that the MiG-21s ideally should have been phased out and retired, in a much more accelerated manner, starting somewhere in the possibly in the late 2000s. Around 2008, 2009 is what many ex-chiefs believe should have been an ideal date, because it was by that time that the indigenous Tejas fighter should have been in service. Now, the Tejas is a much more advanced fighter than the MiG-21, so it's not a replacement in that sense, but by the sheer fact that this was a fighter designed to be cheap to build, cheap to buy, and give the Air Force the ability to operate them in large numbers as a result, it would be the replacement for the MiG-21, which was also operational in large numbers. The Tejas, which now has succeeded in a big way, however, at the time when the MiG-21 should ideally have been replaced, was not available because of various delays in the project and the development schedule, and therefore the Tejas failed to be there on time. It could not be there on time to allow the MiG-21 to be retired gracefully. As a result, the MiG-21 has had to be pushed onward and onward and onward towards the end of its technical life. The MiG-21s, I should once again clarify, are very much within their, their actual technical life. They're allowed to fly. And let me make this very clear. The Indian Air Force would never allow its pilots to fly in anything that was not deemed to be safe. An aircraft that is not certified completely fit to fly before every flight. That always happens, no exceptions, and these are some of the most professional maintenance crew. But when you look at an aircraft that is already vintage, an aircraft that is nearing the end of its technical life, you don't push a car you have for 20 years. You will obviously retire it in a few years, when something better comes along and when you can afford it, and obviously keeping safety in mind. In combat aviation, it's a much more risky business because there you don't have the same kind of safety net that a car has. There, one little mistake and you could die. The other question that a lot of people are asking is the Indian Air Force in such a crunch that it still needs to operate these MiG-21s? The sad answer is yes. That's exactly the point. They are in that crunch because the Indian Air Force has this sanctioned squadron strength of about 42 squadrons. It currently operates only 30 squadrons. Can you imagine? 42 squadrons is what it should be operating, but it only operates 30 squadrons, and that's because it has simply not been able to acquire adequate numbers of fighters. And that's also one of the reasons, not a complete reason, but one of the reasons why it has had to push this handful of squadrons of MiG-21s for so long near the end of their technical life. The retirement of aircraft from the Indian Air Force is much faster than the entry of new aircraft. The Rafale deal for 36 fighters was a hugely diminished deal compared to the 126 aircraft that should have been procured. That would have been about 6 or 7 squadrons worth of aircraft, but ultimately it came down to only 2 squadrons. So all this arithmetic sort of builds up and has an impact on the squadron numbers, and the Indian Air Force needs those squadrons to be able to put up a credible aerial defense against the different threats that are on its battlefield, namely Pakistan, China, and various others. What justifies making young pilots fly MiG-21s? This is a complicated issue and it's an emotive issue. People tend to be emotional, and I don't blame them. Films like Rang De Basanti have to take much of the responsibility for creating that aura around the MiG-21, but it's also public perception about an aircraft that is deemed to be dangerous. The fact is the MiG-21s have been used for training. They've been used for fast jet training for many years together. There's nothing inherently wrong with the aircraft apart from the fact that it is of an old type. It was built around a time when it was meant to be a high altitude interception fighter, against US bombers. It's quite an unforgiving fighter compared to modern fighters in terms of safety, in terms of cockpit systems, in terms of the speed of landing, in terms of the reaction time given to pilots. It's a fairly unforgiving fighter, is what most MiG-21 pilots will tell you, even though they completely adore and love the fighter. And there's good reason for it, because it is quite a beautiful machine. This reputation has of course dogged it, and it's unconscionable. The fact is, even if there are accidents, why should pilots die? Most air chiefs will say that. Accidents will happen. Military aviation is a risky business. Any number of permutation and combination of things can happen in the air that doom an aircraft. But why should pilots die when there are safety systems on board? MiG-21s have Russian ejection seats. So why could these two pilots not get out of them? And in all those accidents of MiG-21s over the many years, why have pilots had to die? Finally, the question is, will the government put process of retirement aside, bell the cat and say enough of the MiG-21s, we will, fast track any process that gives the Air Force what they want? Easier said than done, because aircraft are not made like biscuits. They don't come overnight. They take many years to build. They take billions of crores and thousands of crores of rupees to contract, and it doesn't happen overnight. One air chief very famously said, I don't have a magic wand. It's not like buying vegetables. And that's very true. But the fact that politics has made India's entire acquisition atmosphere very, very finicky, very cagey, not very, not prone to taking difficult decisions because people are scared कि बाद में scam हो सकता है, बाद में questions will be asked, if I sign this document this will happen. The Rafale scam is a very good example of something that went through the process of public opinion, through courts, through agencies, what you may have it, but it has made the system very risk averse as far as acquisitions are concerned. Now whether new acquisitions of the Rafale kind happen in the near future is anyone's guess, but the simple fact of the matter is the MiG-21s continue to be in service, 4 squadrons worth, young pilots continue to fly them, but the Air Force itself is very clear for all young pilots and others that the MiG-21 is safe to fly. If you look at it technically, it's within its technical life, so there's no reasonable reason why the aircraft should not be flown within the limits it is prescribed to fly. To end this talk, I'd just like to say that the indigenous Tejas fighter, I have advocated for a long time that this is the fighter that needs to replace the MiG-21 in large numbers for many good reasons. One, it's an indigenous fighter, it's made in India, using Indian technology, using Indian materials, using Indian know-how. All the scientists who have built the Tejas are right here in India. It should be inducted in large numbers. There are 40 already contracted, there are 83 more coming, there's a new version of the Tejas that's going to come. I believe one of the hard decisions the government can take is we will not wait to see what happens with the Tejas. We will pump money into it because it is our own indigenous program and it is worth it. Rather than pump money into a foreign program, and there will be foreign fighters because stopgaps are required on a quick basis, but the Tejas is the way to go as far as replacing the MiG-21 is concerned, because you get an indigenous fighter which is far more advanced, many generations ahead, much more capable, has the ability to deploy many more weapons and conduct a full new spectrum of operations, and that's the reason. It's the low-hanging fruit, as it were, to replace the MiG-21. Just how much conviction the government has to do this is anyone's guess. We'll have to wait and see, but I'll only end by saying with every crash there comes outrage, there comes introspection, and then 3 days later it's business as usual. Will it be the case this time as well? Let's hope not, but we will continue to track it.